At this point, I finally got the holes drilled for the leading edge skin. As far as tasks go so far in this project, I think this has probably been the toughest one that I've had to deal with, just because we am dealing with curved surfaces, plus also trying to ensure that I've got proper alignment with the ribs. Since this is already assembled, the video will sort of proceed in reverse order. I'll start with what I have right now and then gradually start taking things down and just provide some documentation of how I went about doing this. I mean, not only for my own use when I get ready to do the other wing, but also if someone's is doing something similar, this might give them some ideas on how they want to proceed. So one thing, of course, that has to be done is because obviously the skin is curved, you have to have a way to keep the skin pulled down. So for that part, I'm just using these light-duty cargo straps. Couple of things that I'll point out, of course, first to avoid maybe doing any damage or scratching of the skin is for this for the ratchet part right here. I've got a piece of cardboard underneath it. The other thing is when setting these up, of course, if you I've got it set up where basically this hook is into the cloth loop. If you try and do hook to hook essentially, then that doesn't lay down nice and flat, so that'll wind up at the very least just sort of puckering the skin in some, and also you just can't get this part of the strap good and flat against the surface of the skin to try and keep that pulled down as tightly as possible. Another thing to point out is you'll notice that I've got just pieces of 2x4 on here. It's not quite so bad here, but there is a tendency for the skin, of course, to want to pop up some. So just to put a little extra weight on it, I went ahead and just would lay these 2x4s on here just to try and get the skin down as much as possible. And then actually there's a similar thing over here where actually there's a much wider gap between the fourth rib and the fourth nose rib and the third nose rib. This is where the tank would go, but of course there is a tendency for this to want to pop up as well. And I did have like two of those on there earlier. See, another issue I ran into is the way I have the wing supported. Once you get the entire weight of both the nose ribs as well as the skin on here, the wing was starting to feel a little tippy, like it might want to try and fall forward. So just to add a little additional weight onto the back, I went ahead and added these little sandbags on the back just to add a little bit more weight, just to make sure that this didn't like try and fall forward on me and flop over onto the floor. As before, I wanted to have a camera set up so I could keep track of where the holes are landing on my ribs as I was drilling the leading edge skin into the rib. Now before, if you've seen my earlier videos, I had something cobbled together using a piece of PVC pipe with the camera attached on it, along with a selfie stick, and that worked fairly well, but it was still a bit awkward to use. And one thing I came across were these extendable poles, which I think get used for like washing windows and such. And I found this to actually be a lot more convenient as far as being able to move the camera, have the camera reach inside the leading edge while I'm doing my drilling. Now this one actually is probably a little longer than it needs to be for this application. This actually I think can extend out to 24 feet, so it's actually got like 3 sections to it, and it's very easy to extend these out and of course pull them back, and they move very smoothly, so it makes it very easy to reposition the camera. So like I said, yeah, this one I believe goes out to 24 feet, and of course looking back, probably would be just fine with a 12 to 14 foot, just depending on how far you want to reach in. One thing I want to cover is dealing with the loosening of the straps. Of course, one thing you really don't want to do is just start loosening these straps up all in a row, because then you'll wind up with the one end completely free and then the other one tied down, and it could increase the risk of maybe getting some kind of a wrinkle or smiley put into the skin. The way I deal with that is I'll use Clecos to partially secure the strap while I start undoing everything. So For that, all you need to do, go ahead and loosen this up. Of course, one of these by themselves, you're not going to get a whole lot of spring back, but then you start successively loosening up the others. It's a good idea to just have the cleco ready to go. Go ahead and loosen this up, and then just use the cleco to keep that from completely springing free as the rest of the straps get loosened, and then you can just continue loosening that up in increments until the skin is completely free. So I will go ahead and continue getting the skin, those leading edge skin loosened up, and we'll continue from there. At this point, the skin is partially loosened, and of course still maintaining tension using the cleco. So at that point, all that needs to be done is just grab onto the cleco, just release it, get some more tension out of it, and then just continue gradually releasing the others. And just continue in that fashion. Now, the other thing also to keep in mind is this same technique also works for when you're pulling the skin down. Since there's such a large distance to pull, you'll run out of room for the strap to roll up onto. So if you go ahead and use the clecos to just temporarily secure your strap as you're pulling the other ones down, then you can gradually get that skin pulled down. So I will continue getting the rest of this freed up. At this point, the leading edge skin is completely freed up, and of course it's still hanging by the clecos that are on the other side. The way the wing is currently oriented, it is upside down. So you can start to see some of the features as far as what I've done for helping me secure the ribs to keep them from moving around, and I will go into more details about that after the leading edge skin is removed. What I'm going to document here is the setup that I use for helping me remove and attach the leading edge skin. Of course, since everything is elevated up so high, it would not work to just start removing clecos and just let everything sag down, because the skin would almost certainly sustain some kind of damage or get some kind of a crease in it. So I've set up essentially just a little elevated platform to provide some support to the skin as I remove the clecos, and then once the clecos are fully removed, since it's bridged over to the other table, then I can just slide the whole assembly over to the entire skin over to the other table, and then have full access to the ribs. So I will go ahead and proceed with that and come back once all the clecos are removed. At this point, I've removed all the clecos except for the one closest to the nose. Also, to provide a little additional support, I had some scrap pieces of memory foam that I sort of just stuffed underneath there as well. Again, just trying to minimize the amount of twisting on the leading edge skin as I remove these last clecos. I haven't done this enough times yet to sort of figure out what I think would be the best method, so just about every time I do this, I'm trying something a little different, just trying to figure out what works best. So I'll go ahead and get these last clecos removed and continue on. At this point, the last cleco has been removed from the nose end of the ribs and currently resting on the memory foam. So I'll just go ahead and leave the camera on while I go ahead and get everything, get the skin pulled over to the other side. Okay, so at this point, of course, all you're seeing now is just the back of the skin, but I will finish getting the little bridge taken down, and then we'll take a closer look at the setup that I've used for keeping the ribs in place when doing drilling. So one thing I'll point out that I noticed after I got the skin pulled was that it looks like the tip of the nose ribs had scratched the inside of the skin a bit. So I think one thing that I'll do differently when I do the other skin is either I'll put some tape over the tips of the nose rib or I'll put some tape here on the inside of the skin just to try and make sure that, or minimize any scratching when I do the other side. So one of the things I spent a lot of time giving some thought to was trying to figure out when I'm drilling out these nose ribs how I can keep them steady and not move around when I'm actually drilling them, and also trying to do measurements to do layouts. So what I'll cover here is just the system that I had set up. And essentially there's two things that you have to worry about. One is maintaining the spacing between the ribs, and then the other one is also even once you've got the ribs all locked together, making sure that they can't rack back and forth while you're trying to take measurements. So as you can see here, essentially what I've done is I've set up like a piece of threaded rod that I ran through all the tooling holes that I had put into the nose ribs when I was fabricating them. Now, actually, the tooling holes are not mentioned as part of the plans for the Zenith 650, but at the time that I was making the ribs, I decided I wanted to have the tooling holes there to make sure that everything stayed steady when I was shaping the ribs. So that also, of course, had a secondary benefit that gave me a convenient location to be able to run the threaded rod through. And then as far as adjustment goes, essentially what I've got set up is just some wing nut washers, and there's one on each side. There's one on each side, and that basically allows me to exactly position the rib to where I want it. Ideally getting it as close to 90 degree angle as possible. And of course, just doing that through all the others. Now, of course, since we're talking 12 foot, of course, I'm not going to get a 12-foot long piece of rod. So I just use these, quarter 20 couplers to be able to join multiple lengths of rod together. Now, to deal with the issue of the entire set of ribs when they've been tied together to keep them from racking back and forth, essentially I just set up a pair of diagonal braces. One end, of course, is tied onto the threaded rod, and then the other end is just clecoed into one of the into the mounts for the ribs. Of course, I've got one here, and that provides plenty of stability, and I had no problems as far as things shifting around and moving on me once I got that set up. And another thing that, of course, occupied a lot of my time was trying to figure out how I could get accurate measurements to be able to transfer the measurements from the ribs over to the wing skin, and of course be able to drill the holes. Now, as far as the distance goes right here, I'd set up a reference line relative to the spar caps, and then from there, of course, I could go ahead and figure out what my distances should be as far as the proper placement of where I would expect the rivet holes to go. And on top of that, I also used just a strip of aluminum, I think 016, and just use that to essentially create a gauge so that I could transfer these same measurements over to all of the other ribs, so at least on this point right here all the distances were consistent. I did try another method, trying to figure out how to get my center lines transferred over to the skin using magnets, and you can see something right here that I used, and that seemed to work fairly well, but when I would do cross checks of my measurements, I wasn't always getting consistent results when I would go back and double check my measurements. So while this did show some promise, it had some difficulties. Essentially for this, what I would do is hot melt to the underside the magnet, and then I would just put I had a needle attached to a piece of thread, and once I had the skin on, then I could, the needle would be attracted to the magnet, and then I could mark a little center line there. But again, I had some problems with getting consistent results on that, so ultimately what I wound up doing as far as figuring out what these distances should be for each of for these holes is, I picked a reference point here. I think this is where I had it at this point right here, and then of course measured this distance here, and this would correspond to the edge of the leading edge skin. And then from there, once I have this as a reference point, then I would just use my 2-meter meter sticks, 2 of them joined together, and then take measurements for each of the positions, distances from between the ribs. And that seemed to work well enough. I got pretty good results. You can see the rivet holes here, everything lined up well. And then on these, I mean, I did have some drift, but overall, I mean, everything stayed within as far as the expected or the required minimums as far as edge distance and such. So hopefully when I do it the second time, you know, things will manage to stay even closer to the center lines that I wanted. And of course, I'll also point out this right here is a rope light. This is similar to, or this is the same one that I used when I was drilling out the rear skins. Run the light through here that provided excellent illumination without a bunch of problems with the glare. And then of course, when I was running my cameras through from the root side as well as from the tip side, you know, I was able to keep track of the progress of my drilling and make sure that I wasn't going to have any problems with the rivet holes drifting off too far from where I wanted them to go. So I think this is all I'll cover as far as drilling out getting the nose skin drilled out. Like I said, this is probably the most difficult part that I've run into so far as building this aircraft so far. Of course, now that I've got one down, hopefully the second one will go a bit faster. There's still a little bit more work I want to do on this before I'm going to store it away on its rack and start on the other wing. I still have some reinforcement that I need to add along here that prevents oil canning on the skin. And see, also still need to drill the holes along the spar edge right here. So as I continue pressing forward on this, as I have something interesting to report, I will create more videos.